Oireachtas, Aaron Telefish. We're back in public session now, and everybody's very welcome. We want to welcome our witnesses, our members, and indeed those watching the business of this committee. And before we begin the meeting, I have to bring to your attention a note on privilege. And those of you who've given evidence here before will be aware of this, but I will read it into the record nonetheless. Witnesses giving evidence from within the parliamentary precincts are protected by absolute privilege in respect of any evidence they give to the committee. This means that a witness has a full defence in any defamation action for anything said at a committee meeting. However, witnesses are expected not to abuse this privilege and may be directed to cease giving evidence on an issue at the Chair's direction. Witnesses should follow the direction of the Chair in this regard and are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that, as is reasonable, no adverse commentary should be made as against an identifiable third person or entity. And privilege against defamation does not apply to the publication by you outside of the proceedings held by the committee of any matters arising from the proceedings. And to our members, as usual, I want to advise and remind you of the constitutional requirements that you be physically present here on the confines of Leinster House in order to participate in public meetings. And I won't permit a member to participate where they're not adhering to this constitutional requirement. Therefore, a member who attempts to participate from outside the precincts will be asked to leave the meeting. And I would ask any member, I don't think we have any at the moment, but any member who participates in this meeting via Microsoft Teams, that prior to making their contribution, you confirm that you are in fact on the grounds of Leinster House. And members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice that you should not criticise or make charges against any person or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable or otherwise engage in speech that might be regarded as damaging to the good name of the person or entity. Therefore, if your statements are potentially defamatory in relation to an identifiable person or entity, you will be directed to discontinue your remarks, and it's imperative that you comply with any such direction. And the agenda for today's meeting is the proposal for Inshore Fisheries Income Stabilisation and Climate Compensation Scheme, and we're joined by the following representatives of the National Inshore Fishermen's Association: Mr. Michael Desmond, Cathaoirleach, Mr. John Manari, Vice Chairman, Mr. Eamon Dixon, Director, and Mr. Gus O'Donovan, Director. And I want to thank the National Inshore Fishermen's Association for participation in this meeting, indeed for putting together the proposal, the comprehensive proposal on this item. And I will give you 5 minutes now to make an opening statement, to go through your proposal, and then we will open up to questions and answers with members here. Yeah, so 5 minutes. And just to reiterate, there are clocks around, so to keep an eye on those, and when members have an opportunity to put questions and answers, they will each have 10 minutes within which to put the questions, get the answers, put in follow-up questions, and we'll go around the houses like that. So I will ask you now to give your 5-minute presentation, please.
Thank you, Chairperson and members of the committee. Thanks for inviting the National Inshore Fishermen's Association here today to speak on behalf of our members. The document before you did not come from consultants, economists or policy advisors. It came from meetings around harbours, kitchen tables, wheelhouses all around the coast, where fishermen sat down together over the past 2 years and asked a very simple question: how do we survive the next 5 years? Because for the first time in living memory, the problem facing the inshore sector is not a bad season or a bad market or one single regulation. It's a combination of everything at once, and it has pushed the sector to the brink. How this proposal was developed over the last couple of years. Over the last number of years, fishermen have experienced continuous quota losses from annual negotiations, major increases in operating costs, fuel, bait, insurance and maintenance, spatial squeeze because of offshore renewable energy projects, severe price volatility, a drastic reduction in safe fishing days, and most importantly, a huge increase in the imported inferior quality shellfish from South America and Asia that we cannot compete with price-wise. Fishermen were telling us the same thing in every single harbour. We are not going broke in 1 year, we are slowly being squeezed out. The proposal you have today is the result of designing something practical, not theoretical, that reflects real fishing life. We looked at agricultural supports, we looked at artist supports, we looked at weather loss in farming, We looked at climate adaptation policy, and we asked why a primary food producer at sea has no income stabilisation mechanism whatsoever. That is how the basic income stabilisation payment and climate compensation model was developed, not as a subsidy but as a stabiliser to stop collapse. The current reality in the inshore sector. Right now, the economics of inshore fishing no longer add up. A skipper can invest 200,000 to 400,000 in a small boat, licence and gear, work full-time, land high-quality food and still earn less than minimum wage in 1 year. In many cases, crews are leaving not because they want to, but because they cannot plan a family life around an income that can disappear for months due to weather alone. We are now regularly losing up to 80 to 100 fishing days per year to climate-driven conditions. At the same time, bait prices are becoming unsustainable. Small boats cannot diversify due to closed fisheries. Young people cannot secure loans because of their income being unpredictable. And older fishermen are exiting early with no replacement generation. This is no longer a profitability issue. It is now a continuity issue. Once an inshore fleet disappears, it will not be rebuilt. This sector is not just about fishermen. Every one inshore fishing job supports multiple onshore jobs in transport, processing, marine services and local businesses. If the inshore fleet contracts significantly, coastal towns will not feel a slowdown, they will feel a structural economic loss. And unlike many industries, these jobs cannot relocate. What we're asking for, we're not asking the state to make fishermen wealthy. We're asking the state to recognise that a climate-exposed primary food sector cannot operate with zero income stability, while every comparable sector has support mechanisms in place for them. This proposal is a stabilisation framework designed to keep fishermen fishing, keep coastal communities functioning, and to keep domestic food production alive. Because without intervention now, the decline of the inshore fleet will not be sudden, but it will be permanent. Thank you, Ciara.
Margaret, ask Shin, and we'll go over to now to members' questions and answers. I'm actually going to slip out just for a very short period. I have another matter to attend to, but does anybody object if Senator Boyle assumes the chair in my absence?
First of all, thanks for coming in, and thanks for... sorry. Not used to this. First of all, thanks for coming in. Who wants to start now? No. Well, first of all, boys, thanks for coming in, and thanks for turning up last week in the AV room. It was great to see you there, and it's all about, I think this document, as you said, was done in kitchen tables and everything like that, and round speaking to fishermen, and to be honest, it's 100% accurate. I can't pick any holes in it. What you're saying is totally accurate. I mean, it's coming from the people that's at the face, that knows what's going on and that needs the help, Like, I would go back there now. A couple of boys was on to me already about bait prices. Like, those people telling me they were getting boxes of bait for €8 last year. Now this year it's up on 20 already, and it's going to go higher. I think that's something we really need to look at, because, I mean, if we're not getting the bait, you're not going to get into the pots and the price of it. Fuel alone, too, is another big one. And another man came to me over the weekend, too, and he said the insurance costs now are going up. And that's a really big one. So I think, any proposal, I know there's a good proposal, but I think, we need to be a wee bit stronger on them, because they've changed over the last couple of months. And we need to read the push and kind of push figures for there. Yours is the people that's out in the boat. You know what it takes per day. Like, people tell me they could run the boat maybe for €100 a day between fuel and bait Not there now, it's away sky high. Insurance, like, is another big problem. Crewing is a problem too. Like, young people don't want to go out. I know a man last week took out a young fella and around our area, and he done one day, and he came back into the pier and he says, "Don't be bothered calling me in the morning." So I know, I feel how you just been, how things is working against you. But your document's good, but I think we just need to add a wee bit more, because, listen, without the Inshore, you know, people that, coastal communities are suffering, and like, we've lost enough. But like, they're just a couple of points maybe you should come back into me, because I know fishermen's looking in the day and they're all talking about bait prices, they're talking about fuel, and they're talking about insurance. And yours are the people that's out there, so I'd just like to get your views on it, you know, when you are here. Whoever wants to go for it. Eamon?
Just on the bait, I think, you know, and I totally take what you say on the bait there at the minute, but we estimated that there just the back end of last year, really. And I suppose it's only now that pelagic fish has been landed, because it's mostly predominant pelagic fish we use for bait and stuff, so it was very hard. And it looks now like, you know, if you take the price of mackerel being landed in Killybegs at the minute, I think it's somewhere around €4,000 a tonne. Herring is 500 or 600, maybe possibly even higher. Like, and that's it being landed then when it's processed and coming back to us. Certainly it's going to be, like last year we were paying, I think, something around €20 for a 20 or a 20 kg carton. This year that's probably going to be up on €30 for sure. The other day I actually asked one of the guys who supplies bait to me, he said, "I'll be doing my best to get some to you at 30, but he said it'll probably go higher." He said, "To be honest, there's only a certain amount available," he said, "so once I've the bit I have stored used, I can't guarantee you that I'll even able to get you bait," he said. So we only had a shot at it in the document at that time, but certainly you're right in what you say, Manus. The price is going up all the time, and it's very hard to predict if it'll even be available to us when it becomes later in the year. Like, from an inshore point of view, from a small boat, diesel is probably been kind of held its own for the last year or two. It's been up and down slightly, but diesel was always our highest running cost in the past, but bait is now starting to pass that out. Bait is becoming our highest running cost from an inshore. That's from a pot point of view, from a pot fisherman point of view.
And from a point of, you really need a good mackerel for the fishing, for the crabs and stuff. You know, like, I've listened to other fishermen and they've tried different species of fish and it doesn't work.
No,
you know,
not probably not. You need a mixture for sure anyway. You have to have some pelagic, either mackerel, herring or scad, one of them. Some blue whiting gets used for some pot fisheries as well, but not that much. A little bit more is coming into it over the last couple of years. But even that's hard to access, and we know now that's increasing in price as well. So for us, it's very hard to actually estimate the exact cost of the bait, but you're dead right in that it has only increased anyway and will continue to increase, and I suppose that's because of the scarcity of it, because of the quota cuts. You're relating them directly back to what happened in Brussels in December. There's no other way around that, like, you know.
And another one I had over the weekend too was the price of salt. You know, a fishermen now, they're trying to buy bait at the minute and salt it, and the price of salt has gone up too, you know.
Yeah, you could also take into consideration there as well, which we never had to possibly do in the past, but we're definitely going to have to look at now, is the price of bait storage. Every guy won't have, as you know yourselves, they won't have their own cold storage at home. But you know, even to look at renting cold storage now, that maybe when you get some bait available, that you'll be able to get it and hold it somewhere. That's the cost of that as well, has to be taken into consideration here. That's also an added cost to, at the end of the day, our expenses, like, you know.
And where do you see the crewing coming from? You know, like, it's really down to, from what I can hear now, it's down to a one-man job. Either he can do it himself, because he can't get, like a young fellow went out on Saturday on a boat, and I know of, and he came into the pier at 6 o'clock in the evening, and he told the man who owns the boat, "Don't bother calling me."
Another very, very important point, and I think we raised this the other day when we were at the Brown Crab Working Group, the first meeting of that consultative committee. This is a personal point of view of mine anyway. We definitely need, like, you know, if you look at all the other industries that's out there across the country, there's some type of a way of bringing young people into them. There's apprenticeships, there's all of that kind of thing. There's an incentive for them to get started and to get into it. We really need to put our heads together as a fishing industry and with government to look at some way that we are going to bring young people into this industry. Like, we're trying very hard to make it profitable. You know, we're doing our best to try and do that, but we need to then look at who we're making it profitable for, and that's where we need to start taking young people on board. We're not definitely, if you look back at the fishing school in Greencastle 20 years ago, there was probably up 20, 30 guys in each class and stuff up there. That's died away. Like, if you're going in to become an apprentice carpenter or a plumber or something in the morning, there's money available there while you're doing that apprenticeship. If that was the case for fishing, we would be able to say to young lads, well, why don't you consider this? You get €200 or whatever a week while you're doing your apprenticeship, plus a vessel. Once you go aboard a vessel, you know, where you get your real experience. Obviously, you get part crew share when you go aboard that vessel as well. Something like that has to be absolutely looked at, because, like, you have to look at the importance of inshore fishing and any fishing overall to the communities. As you said yourself earlier, we live in rural communities all around the country. There isn't a whole lot of other employment in those rural communities. Like, you know, they're strategically based, and it's an indigenous sector that we're in as well. If we disappear, there's nobody there, then who's going to really train the next generation that's to come? So it's a critical time, and certainly you're dead right, something should be done again in the future to start investing in bringing young people into the industry.
Yeah, and I just want to, like, where do you see, how, like, you see it there in insurance, I even see it in my own business as rising, but the like of the inshore fishermen, like, they have top of the range stuff, like, you know, everything's on the boat. Like, this was what really maddens me. When you go, you have to get your boat surveyed. It costs so much. You have to wait for a man maybe for to come from Galway or something for maybe 3 or 4 weeks. And, like, there's not many many accidents that I know of on inshore fishermen's boats. Why do you think is the price going up? Is it because they just class it as one man out in a boat now and it's very dangerous, or, you know, because you do get your safety record?
You're just talking about insurance alone. Yeah, I suppose insurance for fishing vessels is slightly different, I suppose, to the way it's calculated, we'll say, for cars and stuff. And it seems to be right across the entire fishing divide that the insurance is based and stuff. And in my own personal case, I know I've been trying to get the price of my own insurance down for a number of years now, and I just can't. It's going up all the time. You're not allowed no claims discount or anything like that because of the way it's based, and it just keeps pushing up and up. It's a huge cost and you can't go without it either, like, you know.
John?
Yeah, just on the insurance, like, we've been told we weren't affected by Brexit. One of the big impacts of Brexit is the loss of options in the insurance market for fishing vessels. I think there's only 2 companies that will actually quote, which is the main reason the insurance has gone up, because of lack of competition. And another big issue we have with insurance for fishing vessels, I don't think a lot of people would know this, but not like your house, where your house goes up in value and you have to insure for the value of your house. The replacement cost of my own boat has probably doubled since I bought it due to factors, but I can only insure that boat for what I paid for. Right. So if I lose my boat, I get what I paid for it, but I can't afford to replace it.
And so if you added on extra to your boat, then you don't, you know...
If you add extra to it, but it can only be based on the purchase cost. Right. Whereas in every other insurance, you insure for the value. If your house goes up, yeah. And if you don't insure your house for the full value, they'll cut you.
I get you now, John. Thank you. Michael?
Just on the insurance, Deputy, I have one of the smallest boats in the fleet, but the insurance was still mental price, so I didn't insure her. And last Monday she sank at the pier due to bad weather. Just phenomenally bad for half an hour, and I've been tying up at the same pier for 20 years. So effectively my business went underwater. Now, if I had a shop in Escarty or Mitchelstown or any place flooding, I would be entitled to compensation straight away from the state. But because of being an inshore fisherman, I'm not entitled to anything whatsoever out of it. So I couldn't afford the insurance because of bad weather not being out since Christmas. And then when I didn't insure her, I suffered. So that is why the financial part of our document is so important to us, because we're caught no matter what way we go. And if we got that, it would help us to pay for the insurance, because until something is done about the actual price gouging by insurance companies, we need the money to be able to pay them, which we can't do now because of the bad weather during the winter time.
Sorry to hear about your boat, Aurelia. Deputy McLaughlin.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Cahirla. He didn't get long in the hot seat today. So first of all, thanks very much for coming in today. I have to say that this is a very welcome proposal. I know that's your first pitch, I suppose, and it's really important that you emphasise at the outset this wasn't the work of, some consultants or advisors. This came from conversations, rooted conversations at kitchen tables and piers and harbours around the country. And for many years I have looked at the situation that farmers have, for example, and they have the single farm payment. So they've been subsidised for many, many years under the Common Agricultural Policy. And I'd asked fishermen, and understandably the response always was, we just want to fish. We don't want any, any financial supports. And I've always admired that. But we're now at a point where the state does need to intervene. And, this is huge stuff. Like this is about the heritage and tradition of our coastal communities and fishing communities. And I'm thinking of many piers. I mean, I'm from the Inishowen Peninsula, as you will know, and I think of all the wee piers and harbours that the inshore fishermen have fished out of, and a lot of them not used anymore, sadly. Then I worked my way down coast Donegal, right down the west coast and up to Clara Head. And you think of the communities, at times I've driven to some of these remote places all around Ireland, and you think of those communities, and those sweeping down into wee piers, and you think of hundreds of years of tradition. That's what you're protecting here. I met with some inshore fishermen, I won't say, but I'll say the southeast and keep it at that, last year. And one of them described how he had to fish single-handedly. There just wasn't any income for anybody else in his family. And he is a strong man, and he broke into tears. It just hit him, what he was saying. And there's another man with him, and it was really, really emotional. And that's what's been happening here. So we now need to come to the point where the state intervenes. The state has to intervene and has to come up with a sensible financial assistance package that keeps inshore fishermen. These are proud people. But I really admire you guys for coming here today, because it wouldn't have been easy to have those conversations. By the way, let's be clear. The proposal to do this scheme is not a replacement for having fish. Let's be clear about that. And we need to make sure that the inshore fishermen get a fair allocation of the various species of fish. That they're not just stuck dealing with shellfish all around the coast. That issue is standalone, and we need to work for that. But this is about common sense. This is about having a financial package that keeps people in the water. And it actually makes far more economic sense than pushing people onto the dole, So we see examples. I've given the example of the farmers in terms of the single farm payment. I also want to look at the example recently of the artists in terms of the basic income scheme. That's a sensible scheme. There's a new offer going to be coming very soon on that. And I know from speaking to some of the artists who availed of it, they told me that that's what's kept them, kept them working. That's what we want. We want to acknowledge that there are people who play a very valuable role beyond economics that goes back, in this case, hundreds of years. That's integral to communities that keeps those piers operational. You know, we all know of some of the piers where there's hardly anybody anymore. I mean, I'm visualising, I'm not going to name them in my own county, where realistically there's no fishing activity there anymore. You know, we want to avoid that, we want to prevent that. So I am a very strong supporter. I normally wouldn't speak for so long without asking questions, so I want to make it clear, and I'm hoping today at the end of this hearing that our committee will write to the Minister for Fisheries and the Marine and strongly issue our support to the proposition. Obviously, you need to negotiate out the numbers and figures. I know you're open to that, but the basic proposition is something that we should strongly support. So I just want to get a sense of you know, the conversation you've had with fishermen. We want to reassure fishermen that we will continue to try to secure the maximum amount of fish, but this is about just common sense, giving them that bait, so that they're not, you know, through circumstances beyond their control, trying to keep the wolves away from the door. You know, they're not, and I know, you know, they're not trying to keep the banks away. You know, that's a constant battle. So this is about giving them that bit of security so they can go out and continue to do what they've always wanted to do and love. So just maybe to talk about that process, folks, and any one of you feel free to come in and talk about just from your own community what it means to your community, and the process you undertook. And that's all. I won't be coming back in again to speak as long as you want, okay?
Thanks, Deputy. And just the first point is what the language that's used. Like, why is it primary producers are told they're subsidised, but artists receive supports? It's the wording even is put against you, and then the general public think like farmers getting free money. This is about supporting rural Ireland, keeping jobs in the communities. By subsidising the inshore sector, we've been totally stripped of our resilience now since probably before COVID times, between no support for COVID, we've had the Ukraine war, we've had Brexit, and all these things. Just on the point of bait, the fish costs now have increased, the quotas have been cut, the fuel costs for freezing the bait, storing the bait, transporting the bait, they all eat away at the resilience in the sector. Michael's made the point, cuts have been made, you cut back insurance. Some people get lucky. Unfortunately, Michael hasn't been that lucky. If the resilience is stripped too far down, when things like that happen, people are going to be lost. Their businesses are going to be lost. When people hear the word fisherman, they think angler, they think you just as one person. There's so much more. We're nothing like that. Every single, even an individual fisherman is a business. For every one job at sea, they say there's 7 ashore. So that one person is supporting 7 more on shore. They say in the south of England and the southwest of England, that's 15. So that shows how far we're falling behind. If we get these supports and get back on our feet, improve our businesses, there's the potential to double the employment of the sector. The inshore sector makes up the largest proportion of the fishing industry in this country, but supporting some in around 7,000 jobs. Let's make that 14,000 jobs. Get the fishermen back on their feet. We won't need the supports. We can learn to walk, stand on our own feet again, and be twice as good as we were before, and the repayment to the country will be tenfold.
Just coming on that. Well, Pádraig, I think, and you mentioned rural communities there, I think you have to look at the wider context of what rural communities in Ireland as well. Like, you know, it's not fishermen, fisherwomen are just one part of that community. Those communities are made up of a lot of people. You have your shops, and you have in the towns and stuff. You have farmers there. You have people working in other tech industry and all of that. But they're all part of that community. They all come into that local town to spend their money, be it in the supermarket or the drapery shop, wherever they go, to spend their money there. And inshore fishing people are very, very much part of that. We spend, like, and the boats that are lucky enough to have crew and stuff, they're nearly, you know, all locals. They're all from the local community. They all spend their money in that community. It's not leaving it. And I think, you know, when you're talking about communities around the country, and you know, most of the industry seems to be going away to the bigger towns. I know when I look at Mayo, that seems to be the case anyway. But we are in those local communities, and our families are as well. I think that's the other thing, and I sometimes make the comparison between you know, fishing people who's fishing and stuff and their families, but those families make up part of the local GA club, for instance. They're always involved in something else in the community. You know, parents are helping out in that club, or they're helping in some other club, be it Rowan or whatever it is. But you have to look at the integral part of those communities that we are. That's so important. If we lose this now, and if we keep declining, then that's going to be a very, very important pillar of that community that's gone. So I think, you know, we need to be looking at the context of that it is so, so important. You know, we're not just that small group to say, oh, sure, if we lost Inshore fishing out the community, so what the heck. Remember, if you lose us, you're losing the families that we come from. You're losing the potential of those families in the future. That's really, really important, guy. That's just on the community side of it.
Michael Ross-Mallet. You can, yeah, if you want to respond to that directly, and then we'll go to the next speaker.
I just, thanks, Deputy, but in the opening statement there, we didn't put in, because it would go beyond the 5 minutes, when we were having these discussions with fishermen, like the sense of anger that's out there, like this, we're not in the situation we're in today by accident. It was cut by cut by cut by cut. And like our ports are ghost towns. The piers that we work out of, it's holiday houses around us. At winter time, there's nothing there like. And a lot of people feel it's by design. There's a vision for offshore renewable energy in our inshore waters. There's a vision for marine protected areas. There's a strategy for Nature 2000 sites. There's a strategy for coastal tourism. But where's the government's vision for us? Like, where do we fit into the picture? We're not in it. And now, you know, we see all this rural TDs and they're talking about the imported beef and 1%. 90% of the shellfish in Irish supermarkets, hotels, restaurants are coming in from Mercosur, other South American countries, and Asia. There are thousands of acres of mangrove forests in Asia are being uprooted to make these huge fish farms for prawns and shrimp. Then the stuff is flown in here, labelled as Irish, with a beautiful picture of a bay in West Cork, Dingle or Donegal on the outside. A heartwarming story about a family business. And then you look at the back and in tiny writing, from India or Thailand. And after it's flown up here, then Timmy Dooley and them are telling us that we must go green. Like, look at the carbon footprint. And we cannot compete against this product. And it's not coming in by accident. And if it's been done to proper environmental standards and there's not slave labour or whatever else involved, how is it so cheap? Like, we can't compare. And our shellfish is so good. We've all been funneled into shellfish because the pelagic quota was taken off us. So we're putting extra pressure on the stocks, but they're wild caught, healthy food. And the name this stuff is giving us in the global market, or if anyone comes here and thinks they're eating Irish shellfish, like, they're not, and something needs to be done about it.
No, I think that's a really fair point, and it was one of our previous engagements. I think the point was made that Dublin Airport is one of the biggest fisheries ports in Ireland, with the amount of stuff that's being landed into it, and they're from there sold in Irish supermarkets. It's a huge issue, and one that we discussed in private session earlier around food labelling. That we're going to look at, and it was Senator O'Reilly who raised the point earlier. So it's definitely something that this committee will look at that food labelling, because it really frustrates me when I'm in a supermarket and I see a tricolour, or you're dead right, Bantry Bay or something, beautiful scenic cliffside location looking out at you, and you see Vietnam or Thailand on the back. Senator O'Reilly.
Today, and I want to thank you for putting together the proposal. Just Minister Dooley has said that EU rules prevent income support for fishers. So I want you to maybe comment on that, and I also want you to give examples of the visual decline that you have seen in your local communities, and so just paint a picture of of what's happening over the last maybe 50 years in your local communities and how it has affected you and the decline. And I see there in the briefing document that one small-scale fisherman creates 7 jobs, and 900 fishers create 7,200 jobs. And that, I think, is what Deputy McLaughlin was talking about when he was talking about the wider, to subsidise the fishermen is actually to subsidise the whole community. And I think that's really what we should be looking at.
Back to communities. I come from a small village near the pier in Ballyglass in County Mayo. And when I was growing up in the village I was in, I think there was about 15 houses in the village. And out of those 15 houses, there was nearly somebody fishing out of every one of them. There might be maybe two or three there wasn't directly involved, where there was a young lad or a dad or somebody was fishing, but somebody out of all of those houses was fishing. Obviously that time drifting for salmon was a huge big fishery for the entire country, and it was lucrative in summertime and people wanted to be involved. But even and back in those times was kind of probably the beginning of crab fishing and stuff off the Mayo coast for sure. And the people, once the salmon was over, people went back out onto pots and stuff and started working with the pots. But that's just one village in rural Mayo, we'll say, in the early 90s up to maybe even the late 90s, there was probably out of I'd say out of every 10 houses that was in a village, there was probably 6 or 7 of them had a fisherman inside of the house. That's not made up, that is actual fact.
So in numbers, what are you talking about numbers-wise? So we're down to 900 now, so what number-wise are we going in the reduction of fishermen?
It's very hard to put a very accurate figure on that. But if you take it in the context of what I said to you, if you take that village now, there's probably 2. At a push, 3 of those houses has fishermen in them in that village at this very time. So it's about a 60 to 70% reduction if you take it in that context.
Gus?
Yeah, you mentioned there about state aid or aid for the fishing community not being allowed under EU state aid rules, but that's hard for us to understand because there was a precedent set over the last few years. We had payments, we were calling them the fuel aid payments around the time of Brexit. Now these were one-off payments. They were insignificant in the scheme of the increase in expenses that we, and the cuts that we took and everything else. But at the same time, a precedent has been set with those aid schemes. There was one last year. It was kind of online surveys trying to get a broader picture of the status of things in the fishing sector, I suppose. And again, there was a one-off payment for that. So, if you look through the document, you can see there that we're not necessarily looking for just handouts. We're quite willing to provide data, quite willing to provide different services to the community, whatever may be necessary or whatever may be help. But yeah, most certainly there's definitely been a precedent set over the last couple of years for aid. The tie-up scheme for the whitefish vessels, I think that was 2 years ago now. That was to reduce pressure on quota species. There was no scheme for shellfish vessels because it was a non-quota species, no scheme for the inshore sector, full stop. But yeah, it's hard to swallow that you might say that it isn't allowed under EU state aid rules. And with regards to the amount of decline, I suppose it's a very hard thing to put a number on because You go back 50 years ago, you wouldn't have had the same registrations and whatnot for fishing vessels. A lot of them would have been, currachs and half-deckers, and they wouldn't have had licences or numbers or anything like that. But just in the village that I come from, I'd say in the last 20 years, there has at the very least been a 60 or 70% decline in the amount of people directly employed on the boats at that quay in Crosshaven there, not far from the city in Cork. But with regards to, I would say it has definitely declined by 60% in the last 15 years in that one small pier. I'm not fishing long enough to tell you about 50 years ago, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, I'm listening to you there, and it's all the losses from Brexit, losses in quota, losses through weather. So how often would you have to be tied up or not out at sea? Is that happening more frequently?
We would be, sorry.
Could I just come back in on you said Mr. Minister Dooley says that
the EU.
we can't support. We met with the EU Commissioner Costas on the 30th of January, and he stated that if a national country wants to amend the rules of the EMFAF to directly support the inshore sector, that can be done. All that the Minister has to do is to write to the EU Commissioner and ask for. There's also the EU Social Fund. There's also the EU Strategy and Adaptation to Climate Change, and the purpose of that strategy for adaptation to climate change is to build resilience, improve knowledge and reduce vulnerability, and I think that ticks a lot of the boxes for our document. And when Commissioner Costas said that about we can request a change to the MFAF, I thought it could only be done in the sections. I went back at the end of the meeting and I asked him directly, and he says it can be done at any time. We have, at the request of the previous Fisheries Minister, there's a register being developed for the, de minimis aid, to increase that to 40,000 over a 3-year period. There's also that, so that there is plenty of options there to get finance from if it's wanted. If the will is there, it can be done.
Yeah, and your question about the days at sea, we would be lucky to get 200 now, I would say.
Is that increasing? Is that increasing the days, the amount of days?
No, it's getting, like, the weather is just getting worse and worse. It's more volatile all the time. If you saw even the news there a few weeks ago, there are surfers coming from all over the world now, even from Cape of Good Hope and Cape Horn, because the Irish West Coast now has got the biggest waves in the world at winter time. And where are they? Up against the coast, where we're supposed to fish out of. We can't get out. Like that morning, my boat sank last week. I'm tying up there for 20 years. And I still got caught. Just was not expecting it, and it wasn't forecasted. It was just violent wind for a half an hour. Like, it's getting worse and worse. Everyone, it's well documented, climate change, the amount of named storms, and like just this week now coming up, I'm not going to be able to get out any day if I had a boat. But it's the forecast is just too bad. And what people don't realise is, you see it's gale force tonight, and then tomorrow it's calm. Well, there's no wind, but the swell stays up for days afterwards. And we're too small to get out. So we're lucky to get out half the year now. And
just the last question, Michael, do you know yourself of any research that the government have done themselves on the potential job losses and the economic, the economic kind of viability of what's happening in your sector? Do you know if there's any research done? Have the government done any in-depth research just about your situation and all these things that are happening, particularly with the losses?
No, the opposite, I'd say. There's telling us that there's jobs going to be in the offshore renewable energy sector for us, and there's going to be jobs safeguarding in PAs through these different environmental umbrella groups. But as for Ourselves, no. I'm not aware anyway, you?
No, I'm sure probably BIM are probably collecting data. I know that they're due to release some results of some data collections that they've done last year or the year before fairly soon. We just don't have them to hand. That's another thing. Some of the figures that's in the document from BIM we had to use from past data that was there, because there was having the most relevant stuff. Just sometimes it takes a year or two to get relevant data to come through that you can stand over, and I think we're due to get some of that fairly soon again now. That will probably state wherever it's believed, but a lot of the time, yeah, you know, some of who feeds into that data from industry and stuff needs to be taken into consideration as well.
But I would know that there's, in the bay I'm from at home, there's 70 to 80% decrease in the amount of fishermen that are there now compared to 2 decades ago. Definitely.
I think
last weekend I was the only boat tied at that pier when that weather came. But now,
Just on the data, sorry, we have a report, part of a report from BAM, whoever their accountants are, they're magicians. Our costs increased, our turnover decreased, but our profit increased. So as I explained to the Minister, how do we go into a common task force when we have BAM saying our profits have increased, but our turnover has gone down, our costs have gone up, but we made more money? So as fishermen, the mistake I must be making in business, I'm making too much and not spending enough. So how do you go into a task force with information from the state body saying you're fine, lads, your profit's gone up? I don't know how that works.
I just want, and just another comment on that, I suppose too. And when you look at it from a financial point of view, like we catch a lot of the shellfish we catch, particularly in summertime, anywhere from, we'll say, Paddy's Day to October, November time. And a lot of the time in that, over that time period, the price of the product is stagnant, really, because we're more or less on a fixed price from a producer factory, or even take lobsters into consideration, going for live export and stuff. The price of them tends to be set across at a fixed price almost for the entire summer period, like, you know, and it's never, okay, if you could manage to get them at Christmas time, which is difficult if you live on the west coast, as you know anyway, you'd probably get a higher price for them at Christmas time. Sometimes, one time at Easter, there used to be a higher price as well. That's kind of dropped away, but you'd be anxious to get out early to try and get a bit of stuff for Easter. That seems to have dropped off. And we were probably getting as much for crab 20 years ago. The prices were the same as they are today, basically, from those factories. Now, they'll probably tell you it's because their market is staying something similar as well, but the price we're getting, and if you put that in context to how much our operating costs have grown since that, it's very hard to figure how we're even trying to stay in business, to be honest, guys, at this stage.
Just on the state aid, if you look back, BIM and the Department will say there's no money, state aid is impossible, can't be done. But there's no longer a fishing sector in Ireland, we're now called the seafood sector. And all these other biotech, if we get an email as representatives to attend a meeting tomorrow, we're not fishing representatives anymore, we're representatives of the Irish seafood sector. And these companies that are importing all the fish from the other side of the world are also part of that. Now, BIM have gotten 15 million euros from the Irish Strategic Investment Fund to give to biotechnic companies. They gave one of them an award before Christmas that is producing feeds that prolongs the shelf life of the food going into the farms in Cambodia and Peru and everywhere else. So the people that are supposed to be looking after the Irish seafood industry are actually the ones that are putting us out of business. Now, how can they get 50, we're like sheep being afraid of the wolf, and it's the shepherd he eats us after, and he takes a bite every day. That's what's happening to us. Why can't money be found for our industry out of the seafood, the Strategic Investment Fund? And these companies then are under the Irish seafood sector, but the fish is coming from the other side of the world? It makes no sense.
That's something that we're going to have to examine for sure. I'm going to go to Deputy Whitmore for her 10 minutes now. Thanks very much, and thanks for coming in and indeed for doing the report. It's a really valuable document to have. I think the statement from the Minister that there can't be support for you, it just doesn't stack up
to me at all. I think even if we're just looking at the very basics of the impact of climate change and the impact of biodiversity loss, I mean, the whole concept of just transition should apply to yourselves in the same way it applies to the Midlands. And when you look at the Midlands and when those jobs were at risk, the amount of money that was pumped into those areas, and it was correct that it was, I can't see why the government isn't doing similar for our coastal villages and inshore, because things are changing, right? You know where I stand on a lot of this. Like, I want to have a sustainable fishery, which means that there may be instances where, we do need to move away from certain practices. But I think it's really important that if that happens, that you're supported either to move to new practices or paid to, as you say, you've identified a few, actions that you could take. So you're still out at sea, you're still, because look, I understand if you've been at sea your entire life, and your family's been at sea, it's part of who you are, and you can't ask someone to leave that behind. So it's really important that the government actually supports ye to move to that sort of a more sustainable future, and I do find it very frustrating to hear that the sort of political will isn't there for it. I mean, like, it's a very similar thing, I think, to farmers. Very, very similar. You have farmers who are producing food. Their practices in some instances aren't sustainable, but they're being assisted to move away from them, as they should. It's the exact same for yourselves, and I don't understand why there isn't the same focus, because from a cultural perspective, from a tourism perspective, from a rural community perspective, and this isn't something that you've I couldn't see it in your document, you haven't and it's very difficult to add a value to that. But when people come to Ireland and they go to our coastal villages, they want to see boats, they want to see fishermen, they want to have that sense. So you perform it's a very important cultural function that you perform as well. So I think it's really important that the government support that, even from the perspective of the money. So even say if the EU money isn't there, the last government set aside $3.5 billion for climate and biodiversity measures. Now, I would much rather see that money being set aside to assist ye to build, and I know I think, Michael, you were talking about the MPAs and the nature restoration. They're not separate. They'll have to be. It'll all have to come in together. I think. It'll all have to be all the different. In order to make them successful, it's going to have to involve fishermen, right? Because but I would much rather see that money be spent supporting yourselves and developing marine protected areas, or putting in the changes that we need in a way that's sustainable from an environmental perspective, but sustainable from a rural economic perspective as well. And certainly I will continue to be pushing for that. I mean, one of the things that we were talking about, like the whole issue of Article 17, I mean, there is mechanisms within Europe that will enable a focus on the work that you do. Like, there absolutely is. And I just think you're sort of continually being squeezed by the bigger players, and a lack of political will into more and more difficult situations, unfortunately. Can I just ask, in relation to the work that you did, you have a whole range of potential initiatives. Was that just a sort of to look at the different options that could be taken on board, or would you see them operating at the same time? Because I think that you have like 7 or 8 different elements.
I think.
They could run concurrently. Of course, Eamon could be doing one thing in Mayo, and I could be doing another in West Cork, John could be doing another in Donegal, different groups doing different things like that.
Okay, so it'd be sort of to suit your needs better, so that there was a choice that you could sort of pick and choose.
It's very important that everybody can't switch to one thing at one time.
Same thing, yeah.
It's the ancillary businesses, it's the buyers that you have to maintain your markets. We've seen when we lost access to the Chinese market, it was very valuable, it was great for the shellfish industry. But when COVID hit, that was lost, and now processors, buyers are really struggling to get back into that. And every time you lose access to a market, there's somebody we might be inshore fishermen in Ireland in the most remote parts of the country, but we were at a stage where if I could catch a crab today, within 48 hours it was in the market in China or Hong Kong. So we're inshore, local, Irish, but we're dealing with the world stage. There's people, could be anywhere, that's ready to take our market, and you lose those markets, it's very hard to get back into them. And then you have your process saying, well, we have to cut the prices to get back in, which knock-on effect.
I just want to come in on something else that you mentioned there, Jennifer, as well. You mentioned about sustainability and stuff from an environmental perspective. Well, and I say we, from an inshore point of view, we've been developing a hook and line fishery for mackerel for the last 10 or more years now. Basically been working on it really since the salmon ended. And obviously markets and stuff was a really difficult issue for us for a long time, but over the last couple of years we've been able to try and get into the markets in a reasonable format. But we've been looking for an increase. We have less than 1%. Well, it's probably a bit more now since the quota has dropped so much in the last 2 or 3 years. But up until then, we had less than 1% of the national quota for mackerel. Now, at the moment, that fish is not there, but in the future, when Ireland's overall TAC for mackerel begins to increase again, there needs to be an increase in that hook and line fishery to make it sustainable for the guys that are involved in it. It's a unique fishery, you know, and it's a very small percentage of the overall Irish quota will make that a very, very sustainable fishery for the inshore sector. That needs to be clearly kept in mind when the quotas begin to grow again. We know at the moment they're down low and there isn't room for to do it, but when extra fish starts to become available, certainly that must be looked at. It's an absolute given for us for survival again into the future. And someone in the past have asked us what we need to be doing further down the road. We look, the short term is what we're talking about in a financial aspect at the moment, but going further down the road, we need to be able to have, you know, there needs to be a future as to where we're going. It doesn't need to be a long one, even if it's for the next 5 to 10 years, then it needs to be there. And as part of that, when those extra quota shares become available, we need to be allowed to grow with them, and particularly that mackerel one is crucial for the inshore sector.
And I think that's what you're talking there about, the sort of the outlook for yourselves, because it's very similar with farming. It's the lack of certainty. So it seems like a lot of the programs that are brought in, it's like, oh, here's a fund now, and then you don't know what's going to happen in 2 years' time or 3 years' time, what's going to be available to you. So it has to be a longevity to it as well.
You know, to get into any of those fisheries, just even if you have a vessel and you're not even buying the boat or the license or whatever, but even to buy gear and stuff for them, you're talking maybe 20,000-30,000 of an investment. That's a huge investment for an inshore guy at the moment, when how scarce money is. But if there was something there to say, well, look, you know, you're going to have an equal opportunity in this for the next 10 years, well, then that guy is going to make that investment and take a chance on it. You need that. It's only just kind of setting a pattern that, you know, you're going to be sustainable for that period of time and hopefully profitable as well.
Can I ask then, if you're currently you have 1% of that hook and line mackerel fishery, what do you think you would need to have what percentage, a doubling of it, or like what would make a difference to you? Because I think, you know, 1% is far too small, and I think any increase would have much greater impact for the inshore fisheries than it would have elsewhere.
Yeah, I suppose, as I said, in the past we've been operating on just 1%. I think we showed back in obviously the COVID years and the 2 COVID years, and I think maybe there was a year after where we were allowed the quota for some reason wasn't being enforced upon us, and in those 2 to 3 years we landed roughly somewhere between maybe 12 to 1,500 tonnes from the inshore sector, from the hook and line. So, you know, and there's a potential there for more vessels to be involved and stuff. So you'd be looking, we've always said that we would want somewhere between 5 and 10% of the national quota to make that a viable fishery. And the other thing with it, we're not, you know, and the other guys has to survive drive as well, and we're not in here to put anybody out of business, that's for sure. But the thing with that as well is every year comes September, October of the year, that excess, if there is excess quota still left in that fishery, it can be pushed back into the main fishery to allow the larger vessels, or it can be used for swaps or something again before the end of the year. So that way, no fish is lost out of the system when you do that.
Okay, thanks. And I'll just finish with just a comment, Chair, if that's okay. Like we've seen and I think Pádraig mentioned it, the basic income for artists, and I do think that's a really good scheme. I think it's really important. But I would actually see fishermen as culturally important to Ireland as actually the artistic, creative side of things. So I think that there should be political will, and obviously we'll do what we can from here as well for you.
Just press, it's all very good to talk about it, and then there's going to be a task force and everything else. But we were working on this document way before Minister Dooley announced there was going to be a task force. And we cannot stress how we need this money immediately. We're holding on with our fingernails. The very first time we met Minister Dooley 12 months ago now, we told him we needed financial aid. Here we are now, 12 months later, and there's going to be a task force. And we all know how task force get in their preliminary actions and blah, blah, blah. We have our members have had mortgages sold to vulture funds. If you phone Ireland, because of the volatility of our income, from COVID and Brexit, if you phone Ireland's leading vulture fund now, and you'll be given option 1, 2 and 3, option 1 is coastal residential. They're our homes. Like, people have no idea how bad it is for the smaller players in the industry. The county sheriff has sent bailiffs to some of our members' houses to take their possessions because they couldn't pay the taxman. The reason they couldn't pay revenue was because the money they had for revenue, they had to use for survival during the bad weather in the wintertime. And it's just an endless cycle. Like, we need this committee to push the minister that this is immediately needed, especially, after Christmas and what that entails for families and everything. We need this now, and we can't see how it can be pulled out of the Irish Strategic Investment Funds for all these large companies that are importing fish from the Southern Hemisphere are promoting it, and yet it can't be found immediately for us. There's no reason why not, why it can't be done immediately. And, our experience of task force, well, in my lifetime anyway, there was 2. One was for salmon fishery, one was for bar funding. We lost the salmon fishery in the first one, and in the second one we didn't get one single solitary penny out of bar funding. 200 million was given back to Europe rather than be given to us. It was given back to them. So, our fate in task forces in this country isn't great.
Can I just come in?
And I think that's very legitimate. We're going to move to the next speakers. We've got 3 speakers and 30 minutes, so just to be fair to everybody. But what I might just say is that the answer you're about to give might be relevant to one of the answers, so if you don't mind, there will be opportunity to come in. So I'll go to Deputy Cahill.
And I'd like to welcome the representatives of the Inshore Fishermen here today. The industry, as we all are aware, is facing very stark challenges. I suppose, to be honest, it's a very sad day, really, when we are talking about financial supports, and I support the case that's been made, obviously. But it's a sad day that it's come to this, and the bottom line is that fishermen want to fish, and we have seen, I suppose, continuous savage cuts to quotas over a number of years, up until including quite recently. The industry, as I said, is facing huge challenges. Fishing communities, fishing men and fisher women are on the very fringe, I think, of extinction. That's how serious this matter is. Obviously, and I welcome the document in your presentation. A proper plan has to be put in place, and sooner rather than later. And I'm listening to what you're saying there about Minister Dooley needs to act now before it is too late. And I also believe that, we need to try and address, if possible, and I'm not sure is it, to reverse these cuts that have been made to quotas. We are at the end of the day surrounded by some of the best fishing waters in the world, and yet here we are talking about an industry that is on its very, very knees. We're paying obviously a very high price as well for overfishing by foreign trawlers. You know, we're repeating a lot of stuff that we have said at pretty much every single meeting of this committee since I became a member not too long ago. Deputy Whitmore referenced there about culture and all of this. This is one of the oldest industries in the world, or sorry, in our country, and yet it's on the very verge of disappearing. And I know a lot of people involved. I know a lot of people that have gone out of the business of fishing, and there's no young people getting involved, and the reason is as obvious as night follows day. And as a committee chair, we need to do everything possible to support the inshore fishing industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, I have a couple of questions, and then I'll come to Deputy Lawless if that's okay. And okay, so look, I remember I grew up in Gaeltacht Nation in West Waterford, and I remember my dad was fishing out of Helvick when I was young and going down the pier, and it was a hive of activity. It was a very exciting place to be as a youngster. It was a hive of activity. There were boats coming and going. There were vans dropping stuff down. There were vans collecting things. There was nets being mended. There was plenty of work for a young lad who was enterprising and didn't mind getting involved in mending nets or cleaning out boats or lifting stuff. And I go down to Helvick now. I don't live very far away, and it's empty. There's a couple of boats, but there's not much activity. Boats are tied up as much as they're out, if not more. The vans, they're not passing with anywhere near the frequency. And there's a whole lot less fishing activity. And then I look at other small harbours along the Waterford coast that I'd be familiar with, Passage East, the inshore part of Dunmore East, Bow Strand, down to Ardmore and Ticknock and Ballingowl, you know, and there's little or no activity. And it just, reflecting on the road up to Dublin this morning, like, that epitomises what has happened, the slow, steady, designed decline of the fishing industry broadly, but particularly the inshore sector. And Michael, you said that a year ago you were holding on by your fingernails, and like, there's very little left to hold on to, and there's very little fingernail left. And it just occurs to me that we're about to see the end of the inshore fishing way of life and industry, unless something dramatic and drastic happens immediately. And I think that has to be the clear message coming from this committee. Young people, my neighbours, my friends, lads I went to school with, they've no notion. They could walk into, you know, they could go fishing in the morning, but they've no notion of doing it because they don't see a future in it, and they don't see a way to make a livelihood. A couple of speakers have already mentioned the cultural and the heritage part of this. Again, I live in the Gaeltacht, raising a family there through Irish, and I know that if the Gaeltacht is allowed to fade out, it won't come back. The whole raison d'etre of it is that it is a living language community that has always been thus. It has always been there. It's not that it was manufactured. And if the Irish fishing industry is allowed to die, that'll be the end of it. And if the inshore men go, they're not coming back. And there'll be no matter how many schemes, no matter who's in government, no matter what we might like to do from those benches, you can't recreate it. It has always been there. So the clear message, I think, and what I get from your document, because it's a very comprehensive document, it goes down through the multiplier effect that inshore fishing has in local economies, but it does much more than that. I think it sets out the emergency that's there. It sets out that this has to happen now, and it also used the word support, because I think you said it really aptly, that for other sectors it's called supports, and for fishing it's a subsidy. It's like you're being subsidised. And this is about keeping a way of life, keeping our coastal communities alive. And I keep asking myself the question, does this government want to surrender our coastline? Does it want to surrender our communities? Is it giving up on Irish fishing? And I think the answer to those three questions is yes. By any metric, what government has demonstrated in successive governments through its policy positions is that, yes, it emphatically does want to surrender our coastline. It does want to surrender our coastal communities, and it does want to give up on our fishing industry. So we need to take a stand here, and you appreciate, you've been here, that we're limited in what we can do, but our job here in this committee is to hold government to account, is to point to policy positions and to point out wrongdoing and shortcomings by the Minister and by this government. So that's what we're going to do here, and your document sets off that conversation really strongly. But that's more of a statement than a question, but I'll give a chance to respond. I see John has his hand up, and then we'll go to you, Michael.
Yeah, like you ask, is it by design that we're being squeezed out? When quota cuts come in, the pollock was closed, 1st of January, the inshore sector was stopped, cannot fish. But why then, we talk about other fisheries in this document. Just take, for example, bass. The bass stocks are healthy, the science says they're healthy. There is a provision there to prosecute a fishery for bass with a small outtake that wouldn't affect the stocks could still grow, yet we can't do it. There's so many roadblocks put in our way, but when it's going the other way, it can be done overnight, stroke of a pen, you can be stopped, but we can't get access to these. And another point I'd like to make is, we all hear about the supply chain, the food chain. There's something systematically wrong for all primary producers in this country when it's easier to make a living off the back of a primary producer than it is as a primary producer. I said it here before, we're told we're all links in the chain, but the primary producers are the anchors that hold those chains in place, and if you lose those anchors, your chain's gone.
Well, and to add to that, I mean, that first link in the chain, to borrow your metaphor, it's what creates the wealth, and everything else is a multiplier of that wealth. So I think, and that's the way you've put it there, I think that's the message that government just doesn't seem to get, and that we have a duty to make them listen to.
And when those other suppliers in the chain, when their cost goes up, we have to take less.
Michael.
Yeah, on that, Deputy, you're 100% correct, but your two words there were most important when you said by design. This isn't happening by accident. Like every single policy change in the fishing industry for the last 20 years was to benefit the minority at the cost of the majority. The only thing that was ever shared fairly amongst fishermen in Ireland was the criminal justice bill, where we were all treated as criminals. That was the only thing. Like, you also made a brilliant point, I thought, after the December Council, when you asked, are we a sovereign nation or a colony? Because we seem to be a colony of the EU now. Well, we think we're a colony within a colony, because what's been done to us with the taking of all these fisheries, and like everyone knows the damage seals are doing to the fish stocks around our coast, but no one is going to take it on. We're allowed to go fox hunting, badger culling, deer culling, everything. Like, if salmon fishing was reopened and we just took a portion of what the seals are taking, the stocks will improve. But no one is willing to tackle it, I presume, because it will cost votes, but yet minks, badgers, foxes, everything else, and none of them are doing the damage to the wildlife. Like a seal doesn't have a predator, so its prey will become extinct. We can fish for salmon and bass and trout and not take half of what they are taking if the numbers are brought under control.
Did you want to come in, Eamon?
Well,
you were going to make a point earlier.
I was just making the point about the task force, Conor, to be honest. And like, going back to the last task force, I think I almost alone was the only dedicated inshore representative, I'll say, in there, from right across the entire inshore industry in the country. And I think that was probably a lot of responsibility just to be on one guy. NIFA were just coming into PO status at the time. They weren't allowed to sit on that task force, which was unfortunate as well. But next time, and I know Michael is saying, and we definitely need to get this document recommended and stuff, but in this task force, we need to get equal. We're not looking for majority representation or anything. We need to have equal representation in that room. The Inshore Fisheries forums provide a very, unique way of providing that representation, because those guys are elected on to their local RIFs anyway from all around the country. The local fishermen select them and stuff, so they're well capable of representing, and each one of them would represent somewhere in the vicinity of 300 vessels or so. So they need to be part of that task force. We just need to have a balanced view inside. I know there's an independent chairman there, but there needs to be a balanced view inside, which indeed should stretch across to all of the committees that are at government level in this country when it comes to the fishing industry. But certainly on the task force this time around, we need to have an equal voice in the room. That wasn't the case the last time, and henceforth, as Michael said earlier, 200 million ended up going back to the EU, which was disgraceful at the end of it, to be honest.
Thank you very much, Eamon. We might go to our second, our last two speakers. Gus, and I know you want to come in, but I'm sure there'll be an opportunity in response to those questions. So just because of time, we'll take 7.5 minutes each, and I'll go to Deputy Lawless and then to Deputy Conway-Walsh.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on this committee. I want to welcome you in here today into this committee, and I want to thank you for your work as well in terms of the AV briefing and what you're doing, because you are not just fighting for your sector, but you're actually fighting for coastal communities, which is so fundamentally important, and everything that you've outlined here today is testament to that. I'm really here to urge my support in relation to it, to commend the report that you have done and your opening statements, and recommend it to the Minister as an endorsement, and that we must address what's happening. The government have, I believe, surrendered coastal communities in the fishing sector. It started most significantly with Brexit. It has continued with the Hague preferences. And it is clear that unless something happens, unless we ensure that there's a fair compensation scheme to get us over these quota cuts, we may not have a fishing sector or an inshore fishing sector in the future. I was very struck by the fact of the seafood survey, the fact that you're asked to outline your bank accounts, etc. Meanwhile, there are massive landholders in the country that receive cap payments and do not have to outline their bank accounts. And that is wrong. And I believe that through the chair that this committee should outline that to the Minister at the next available opportunity, that this practice must end. Also, in relation to the state aid rules, it is the direction of Europe that member states will have a greater flexibility in relation to the next cap. The MMF, the multi-annual financial framework, is now being worked on for the next cap. And I think this committee must stress in a very important way that that flexibility must be exercised in terms of protecting fishermen. You have been absolutely sidelined for far too long. And when I would ask the committee at the next opportunity to raise this with the Minister and ensure that the flexibility that is going to come in the next cap, that the fishermen are the beneficiaries of that flexibility. Just as well, in relation to the task force, I would like to put on record in terms of the committee that the fair representation for the inshore fishing sector must happen. And until that happens, I believe that basically there should be no agreement in relation to the task force. A task force that does not provide fair representation for the 90% of fleets or vessels in the country, the sector that supports 65% of employment in the fishing sector, must have fair and equal representation on the task force. And that must be a red line issue for the committee and for the task force. I also want to say very clearly that the food labelling must be addressed. I am on the Agricultural and Food Committee. It is a key priority for me. In Aintu, we intend to bring forward a bill into Leinster House to ensure that food labelling is tightened and that the origin of food is labelled very, very clearly. It is absolutely wrong that Dublin Airport and the airports of this country have become the biggest ports in this country. And that is a shame on all of us, and a shame in terms of the food regulation and food labelling. So I would like to extend the invite, and I look forward to working with the fishermen to try to bring regulation. And it is our absolute intention in Aontú to bring forward the legislation. We'll be working very closely as a priority in the Food Committee, and I would ask you as well to work on that here. Just in relation to Hook, the missed opportunities in terms of the shellfish processing, and maybe this is for you, Eamon. Ballyglass Harbour is the only realistic deep water with capabilities in terms of inshore activity. Can you outline the loss in terms of economic leakage of not having a facility, not having a processing facility in North Mayo, in Erris, and what that means in terms of the economic loss to the region, and also in terms of the hook and line mackerel? If you could maybe explain that in more detail, and in terms of what you'd like to see the committee do or raise with the Minister at the next opportunity. And indeed, I know I haven't asked a specific question, but if there's any other comments or feedback in relation to that, I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
I suppose to take maybe the hook and line fishery into context first, and we've already spoke a little bit about it there. I think, you know, as I said, from now on, when we go back to stock, particularly the mackerel stock increase in quota allocation to Ireland again, which it will, please God, in the next couple of years, we need to take into consideration at that stage that the hook and line fishery is an integral part of that quota, and the allocation that's being given to us needs to increase as those years go on. When an increases begin to happen in the Irish TAC, the hook and line fishery needs to increase with that. There's no doubt about that. In relation to Ballyglass, Ballyglass is just a typical inshore fishing port, really. I suppose we've a reasonable pier there with access most of the time for inshore vessels, all of the time, I suppose. But larger vessels has sometimes struggled to get in there. They need the tide to be high and stuff. For a lot of years, Paul, we've tried to increase or to improve the facility we have there. Before your time, we went back and we spent, I think, something close to 100,000 altogether down there at one stage doing feasibility studies and everything else, trying to get that pier increased to the kind of volume of stuff that could actually come in there. As it stands, we're probably one of the most still progressive small ports in the country, but there's huge potential. As I said, when the hook and line fishery is on, it's anybody from here can drive down to Mayo and have a look at what happens there when that's happening. But that could be, I suppose, that could be any pier. That could be a pier in Kerry. It could be a pier particularly in the other Cork or over in Watford. Where the major fishery harbour centres are, we all know there's a lot of activity in those. Sometimes it's only for a short period of the year. I've been going to Killybegs all my life, and I've been fishing for over 40 years now. But the activity has dropped off there at certain times of the year as well. It's very quiet there, and summertime there's only a handful of small boats trying to still continue fishing all year around there. So definitely there needs, again, we fall down when it comes to the funding of harbours that are not part of the department's remit. We fall into local government, and it is very hard to, the first thing you need to do is all of your studies and stuff. Then you need to have all of the other relevant government agency stuff, a licence to start it all. It's hard, sometimes it takes time to get those. They're important that government, it's all part of a longer plan to make us sustainable and more viable. They definitely need to be looked at from a government level. I don't know, did I answer or left out part of what you needed to know there, but the sustainability, we can definitely push on that ourselves, and we're all the time trying to improve on that. A processing plant, certainly again, and again, the processing plants that are in the country, we're very respectful of them. They take our product all the time, but certainly there is an opportunity for somebody to come and build a processing plant somewhere in North Mayo, that's definite.
Deputy Conor Walsh.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me.
False rules.
Thank you for allowing me in, because I'm not a member of this committee, but I was particularly keen to come here today because the inshore fishermen like yourselves were here. Now, I want to address the issue with the task force first, because I think that's an indication of how the Minister and how the government are going to treat inshore fishing. Inshore fishing is vitally important for communities like my own and the other coastal communities in Mayo and beyond. So I just want to clarify this from you. For the inshore fisheries, there are 6 forums involved here, 6 fisheries forums. Have you had an indication from the Minister that each of those 6 forums will have a voice on the task force? Maybe just quickly.
No, not to date. We have requested it. We've wrote to the Minister to request it. To be honest, we've not had any real direct contact with the task force or with the chair of the task force. We've been unable to get an email address for that guy for over the last couple of weeks. We've prepared a lot of documents. We are sending them to DAFM and we're hoping that they're passed them over. But we've had no direct consultation with either Minister Dooley now in the last couple of weeks or with the new chair, Michael Berkery, of the task force.
Yeah, thanks, Eamon. So you're hoping they'll pass them over. That's the best that you can do. Like, it just seems to me like the inshore fishermen and fishing families are being blocked out of the decision making. If you set up a terms of reference, and if the terms of reference from the beginning isn't fair and there isn't equity within the terms of reference, I mean, then, you know, are we going to end up in the same situation again where there isn't a proper voice for us? And when I say us, I mean obviously all the coastal communities that are represented by yourselves here.
You know, Michael mentioned it earlier, like, to be honest, I suppose if you talked to any inshore person around the country, they'll tell you that their prediction for the task force would not be good. In the past, we've not done very well when it comes to task force. As I said earlier, I was the only dedicated inshore representative on the last task force, and we've seen what happened at the end of that. Maybe that was all of my fault, but we tried during that task force. I convened many meetings outside of it, tried to put forward a lot of good initiatives to get more funding for the inshore sector. Michael was involved, the Maddox Crowley was the chair of NIFA at the time, he was as well. We put them forward, but every single time we were told, oh no, they won't work for X, Y and Z reasons. And then it came all the time down to the consensus inside in the room, which was led by another group, and we were never considered in when it comes to that. That can't be the case going forward, to be honest.
And I would say, one thing about the inshore fisheries, that for every problem that's presented, there's a solution presented as well. But, you know, if you just have one person there and there's a weighting on that task force, obviously it's going to be weighted in another direction. This just has to stop. It is just critical. You know, this is why you have the likes of, say, 200 million being sent back. Like in areas like Balmullet and Mayo and other coastal counties where you have €200 million, where we are absolutely desperate for every penny that we can get for our natural resources. It just is completely not right. I think the committee here, and apologies, Chair, if this has already been suggested, but I think we need to write to the Minister to clarify that all the submissions that have been made, albeit that they cannot get the contact details for the Chair, which I think is a bit absurd as well, but that the submissions are being taken on board, that there will be the proper equity in terms of representation there. If that could be done, I think that in the absence of not having the details of the chair to be able to ensure that the terms of references are okay. There's just another thing I want to ask you around them, and it's around the quota, and because it does seem to me like that the quota there's attempts to privatise the quota here in, you know, the way that it's done.
In this country already.
So it's already private?
No. Quotas have been privatised and everything but name, basically. If you have policies that restrict access to those quotas, policies that dictate how those quotas are distributed.
So what I want to ask you, because my time is limited, what opportunities do we have to ensure? Eamon and I come from a community where we've had our biggest natural resource given away in our oil and gas. What opportunities do we have to pull back, to even the playing field, and to ensure that there isn't creeping privatisation on the quota?
Pelagic quotas have been in everything but legislation being privatised by ministerial policy. Ministerial policy in this country dictates how any quotas are distributed, and it's up to the minister of the day whether they choose or not to change that policy. Well, I've brought this up with Minister Daly before, and one of the CEOs of the other PO jumped in and says, we have one of the fairest distributions of whitefish quota probably in Europe, and that's fine. It's great that I get access to rockall cod, rockall haddock, porcupine prawns every month, and that's wonderful. But when you can't get, why then do we have such a situation where we have herring that are traditionally been an inshore fishery for hundreds of vessels around the coast, and we hear talk of track record used as access to fishery. The inshore sector doesn't have track record. We have historical records. We have books written about the inshore sector's development of these fisheries, yet ministerial policy restricts our access to these quotas.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I completely agree with what John is saying, but I think there in a recent NIFA meeting, I asked the department directly. I was part of a discussion that was there. Is Irish fishing quota still a national resource? And it came back in clearly, quite states in the minutes that they believe it still is.
Okay.
So it's time, and that's as well a big mistake that was made in the last task force was that, as John mentioned, the distribution of Irish whitefish quota. For every tonne of whitefish quota that's, we'll say, distributed to the industry, an over 55 vessel gets 1 tonne, an under 55 vessel gets a half a tonne. No matter what, that's the way it's been distributed at the moment, and that's for the month or whatever is ahead. It's distributed on a monthly basis. Like in the last task force, the majority of the inshore sector was completely excluded from that. Our right to that quota. We all hold polyvariant licences, which is very important. It gives us the right, as a state, to apply for a licence each year to use that to go fishing. But when it comes to a financial aid in that task force, our right to that whitefish quota in particular was ignored, completely ignored.
And just on that point, in the Brexit task force, the pelagic vessels got what was called a liquidity scheme, and when you look up the word liquidity, liquidity is the cashing in of an asset. So to say whether they're private or not,
I know my time.
How can you cash in something that doesn't belong to you?
Okay. Thank you.
So we're just on time. Unfortunately, we're bound by time in this room. Another committee will need it shortly. So that brings us to the end of this particular meeting. Bavalam of Oireachtas Choranuldiv as ve in our downta in Yovag on Cálpéis a Churfin Amrod our Geshna Raggart. I want to thank you for being with us today. Our 4 witnesses from the National Inshore Fishermen's Association for preparing that document, for circulating it to us, and for discussing it here at the committee. We as a committee will meet in private session next week, and we will be sure to discuss exactly what steps we're going to take out of this, particularly in relation to Rose's suggestion there and the issue you raised about the task force. I'll engage with the Minister directly on that today, because that doesn't strike me as good enough or good practice. So we'll try to get to the bottom of that. But look, you've given a huge amount of food for thought. You have used this forum to articulate the urgency that the industry is facing. We were aware of that, but it is good to air it, and we will certainly be discussing how best we can engage and how best we can advocate. Gurmil Magov. Thanks. And that concludes our business, so the committee stands adjourned until the 17th of February 2026.